I'm delighted to be speaking with Gifford Pinchot III this morning. Gifford is an honours graduate from Harvard, co-founder of the Bainbridge Institute, the first school to offer an MBA in sustainable business, co-founder of the consulting firm Pinchot and Company that has served over half of the world's Fortune 100 companies, as well as many other companies, helping to launch over 800 new products and new businesses. He's also the recipient of the Olympus Lifetime Education Award, to name just one of the many prestigious awards that Gifford has received over his career. He's a best-selling author. And most importantly, for our purposes today, the godfather of the intrapreneurialism movement, having coined that term over 35 years ago. So in 1985, Gifford and his wife Libba wrote the book Intrapreneuring: Why You Don't Have to Leave the Corporation to Become an Entrepreneur. And the book was a New York Times bestseller. It was published in 15 languages. Now today, intrapreneurialism is a global phenomenon, transforming our workplaces and the way that we work. So it's easy to see why Gifford's been named among the top 20 leadership thinkers in the world. So Gifford, let's start at the very beginning. What inspired you initially to come up with the term intrapreneur?
Well, it's not very glorious. My wife and I had a blacksmithing business, and it was going very well. And then we were discovered by Mexican blacksmiths who could make everything that we were making at a fraction of the price. And we ended up selling the business, and we still owed the bank $80,000. And it occurred to me that in situations, and that was our net worth minus 80. It occurred to me that in that situation, because we had sold our house and everything else, it occurred to me that maybe getting a job was the best thing to do. That this was not really a position in which to start another business. And so I thought about what kind of business I would like to be in. And I thought, well, I want something that's sort of like being an entrepreneur, but I'm working for a big company. And so I began thinking about what the rules of that game would be. And my wife and I wrote a paper about intracorporate entrepreneurship, in which we coined the word intrapreneur as a contraction of intracorporate entrepreneurship. It was, in a way, kind of a survival mechanism, but at the same time, I thought maybe this might be useful to people other than me. So that led us to begin writing about it and so forth. And that paper, which we wrote, fell into the hands of Norman McRae at the London Economist. And he wrote a 5-page article about it, giving me credit for coining the word entrepreneur and the concept, and talking about why he thought it was a really important and good thing. And that kind of helped get things going for us.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Then we began getting calls from other people wanting to know more about it.
Yes, well, it's definitely an idea whose time has come. And now I do notice that more and more people are becoming familiar with the term intrapreneur. Once upon a time, if you used the word, people would say, oh, you mean entrepreneur? And you'd have to explain, no, we actually mean intrapreneur. So could you give us, in your words, your definition of what is an intrapreneur?
Well, I think the broadest definition is any employee who uses their entrepreneurial spirit for the benefit of their company and their dreams. Yeah,
wonderful.
And, there's many other definitions. I like the dreamers who do.
Yes.
Because that puts the two pieces that have to go together.
Yes.
It's okay to come up with ideas, but it's not worth much unless you actually do something about them.
Exactly.
And entrepreneurs are inveterate doers.
Yes. Yes. So they operate at both ends of the spectrum. They can come up with the creative ideas. They can see the opportunities, but by the same token, they also take action and bring them to fruition and make them happen. So that's the important aspect.
Which is also a creative act. In other words, if you think of the amount of creativity necessary to launch a business, maybe 5% of it is coming up with a good idea of what business to launch. And then there's all the creativity that is necessary to get around all the obstacles and solve all the problems that come up along the way. So
Exactly.
even if they take someone else's idea, which sometimes happens, I don't mean steal it, but legitimately take it, that person hands it on to them. Most of the creativity as well as the doing will fall on the entrepreneur.
Yes, absolutely. And so that leads us to the question of how to be a good intrapreneur. So what would be your advice for people who are perhaps just aspiring to be entrepreneurs or just about to identify themselves as such, starting on their entrepreneurial journey? What would you say to them?
Well, first you have to maybe wait until there's an idea that takes a hold of you and says, I can't help myself, I have to do something about this because it's that important. So the relationship that you have with the idea is very important. Entrepreneuring is difficult enough that if you're just doing it to make money or get a promotion or something like that, it's not going to work out well. There has to be a connection to your heart and a connection to your values that drives you forward. And so my first advice is don't start being an entrepreneur unless you are in the situation where there's something that you really, really care about.
Yes.
And that you can do something about.
Yes.
The second thing is that you then have to sell your idea inside the organization.
Mm.
And my first piece of advice, which comes from the fundraising world, is ask for advice before you ask for resources.
Yes.
So you go up to a potential sponsor, someone who's going to back you and protect you inside the system, and instead of asking them for something that they probably won't give you at that time, if you say, gee, I need to know more about the marketing aspect of this. Could you recommend someone who I could go to talk to about that? The chances are that they will then say yes and give you a name. Now, right away, they've spent just a tiny bit of their social capital on your idea. And there's two possibilities. One, they wasted that social capital and they're a bad manager, or that was a good idea to use their social capital and therefore you have a good idea. They choose the one that feels better, which is that they made a good decision. This is a tiny support that they've given you, so it's a tiny move towards your idea being better. Then you go and you talk to that person. They help you. Some of their ideas maybe you don't like, but some of them are good. And you come back and you offer gratitude to that person, that you the would-be sponsor. Now, when you tell them that you're grateful and that they helped you more than they might have imagined they had helped you, this means they would have made an even better decision about your idea, and so it becomes an even better idea. And then you can ask them for little tiny favors, and you just keep building up, asking for things to which the answer is always yes. And as they become more and more committed, the size of things that you can ask for that you're pretty sure you'll get a yes answer to increases. On the other hand, if you ask them for something that they don't give you, the exact reverse psychology applies, and your idea has to be bad in order to make that decision a good decision. So only ask for things to which the answer is yes.
Very good advice. In fact, it's one of the things that comes up most often when I'm working in organizations and mentoring intrapreneurs. Very often that is the most crucial question. How do I influence other people in order to gain their support? That's the area that most people feel least confident about. Often they're very passionate about their ideas, but they feel uncomfortable about selling it in their words, selling it to others or getting other people on board. So that process that you've just described there is absolutely central to the success of intrapreneuring.
Yeah, the next thing I would say is move very rapidly to rapid prototypes. And these can just be cardboard mock-ups or whatever. They don't have to be a working device. But people, when you tell them about something which is really new, have great difficulty imagining it. So the feedback you get is not to your words, is not necessarily valuable. But if you can show them what you're talking about, they can get it.
Yes.
And you can get useful feedback. And that feedback is useful for two things. One, obviously, it helps you to redesign what you're going. You know whether you're on the right track or not. And you can go through, if you're making very cheap prototypes that are just mock-ups. You can go through many iterations of design in order to get to something that's really going to work. I'll
Yes.
give you an example from my own experience. One of our clients had an opportunity to acquire a new medical testing device that would sit in the doctor's office and provide immediate answers to blood tests. And the question was whether doctors would like it or not. And the answer the doctors gave was, oh, yes, of course, we would love that. But our client had some concerns that situations might arise that the doctors wouldn't like. So we took a cardboard box, cut a hole in the top of it, set it on top of a card table, cut a hole in the card table, got a strip of adding machine paper, dressed up as a patient and a doctor. And the patient came in, gave the blood sample, and the machine shoved up the little piece of paper that came out, and the doctor looked at it, and suddenly a worried look came onto the doctor's face. He didn't have any idea what to do, or it was a terminal diagnosis, or what. Anyway, all the sorts of things that he would rather have learned in his back office, had time to prepare himself, and then come in and tell the patient. And his sense of the omnipotence of doctors was punctured in this example. And there were a couple of others that didn't work also. And eventually, the client consumed that the machine, despite the fact that it did instant tests, would probably have to be in a back office, which kind of made it less valuable. And so, but what happened with just that cardboard prototype was a lot more knowledge of how customers would actually respond that you could not get to by talking to them.
Exactly.
If you said, wouldn't you be afraid that blah, blah, blah would happen? They said, no, we're big boys. We're doctors, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
You know how it goes.
And it wasn't it wasn't until you really simulated a real situation that you actually uncovered that really important piece of information that could have potentially completely sidelined the innovation if it hadn't been addressed.
Yeah, and the nice thing about this advice is that you can probably do this out of your own pocket money.
Yes.
You don't really have to ask anybody if you can cut up some cardboard boxes. Now, I admit the card table cost a few bucks, but
well worth it. Well worth it. That's a wonderful example. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, because I was going to actually ask you at some stage if there was a particular example of successful entrepreneuring that you wanted to share with us, but you've just shared that one. So let me just move on to thinking about this whole notion of the rise of the intrapreneur, and that we're entering this age of entrepreneurialism and entrepreneuring globally, because you would be well aware that there's just getting so much traction. There are a lot of articles about it. People are talking about entrepreneurship. People are aspiring to be intrapreneurs. So it's a global movement that's gaining immense traction and momentum, and it's generating its own energy. So I wanted to ask you, why now? So the concept that you coined over 35 years ago has been around for a while, and the notion and the idea has been articulated for a while. Why is it that right now it's gaining this global momentum? Why now?
Well, I think there's a push from the bottom and a push from the top. The push from the top is taking place because we're living in a very disruptive time. And it has become obvious to people who are running big organizations that the current rate of innovation and the current kind of daring of innovation, which is going on in their organizations, is not sufficient, and that they could easily be roadkill in the economy, which they prefer not to do. So they need, and we know that innovations of any significance require an entrepreneur to push through the bureaucracy, to keep going despite all the no's that the system generates. And so the evidence is overwhelming that to do disruptive innovation, you need entrepreneurs. You need them for a lot of other things too, and I could get to that later. But so that's a push. The second push is that there is a epidemic of disengagement in the employees. In entrepreneuring, entrepreneurs are almost by definition totally engaged.
Yes.
They so it's a tool for keeping your best people. It's a tool for that. And now let's look at it from the bottom. We have a lot of millennials and Gen Zs, and what are they saying? Well, first of all, we don't buy the traditional offer that's been made to us of lifetime employment. We don't believe you, and we're not sure we want that anyway. In fact, what we want is to be able to make a difference soon in our careers. We want to be able to make a difference in the direction of our values, not your values. We're willing to make money for you, but doing things that we really care about. So you have this, on the one hand, all this interest in the young in entrepreneurship, which is coming just from who they are. And they've looked around and how could this possibly happen? It's a little bit like my transformation when I went to work, where I said, well, if I really was going to be happy inside a large organization, I would have to have a role that was somewhat entrepreneurial.
Yes.
And so the young are saying the same thing today.
Yes.
And they could get that by being entrepreneurs, but there's a lot of reasons why being an entrepreneur is hard for the young today. Part of which is school debt and so forth.
Yes.
I don't know if you have that, but
yeah, we do.
But you come out of school and you're in debt. What can I say? That's not the best place to start a business from.
Yeah, absolutely. I know what you mean. And we do have that in Australia as well. And right now, the world is in need of people who are ready to step up and solve complex problems and are ready to put their passion and their energy behind important ideas that will contribute to their workplaces as well as to the world. So we're entering the age of the entrepreneur exactly at the time when we need them to step up and contribute their great ideas. So thank you.
Yeah, and I want to say that one of those complexities which is entering into the world is climate change, which again threatens to change everything. So one of the things that I'm most interested about in entrepreneurship right now is the people who decide that they really want their lives to make a difference in the biggest issues of our time, like climate change and poverty and so forth. And that is driving a lot of creativity.
Yes.
And maybe I'll tell you one story.
Yes, please do.
Fair enough. Yeah. So one of our graduates was the sustainability manager at T-Mobile, and he watched millions of phones with all the embedded energy in them and all the energy that went into mining that gold and so forth. All of that was thrown in a basket, shipped off to China or Africa or wherever, where people threw the phones on fires and melted them down, creating great pollution and salvaging a little bit of gold or whatever out of the phone. That was the end of the phone's life. And he said, but wait a second, this is a perfectly good phone. Why are we doing this? And he went to his, he would file papers and ask for a refurbishing center and the ability to sell the refurbished phones. It never penciled out for T-Mobile, which was under extreme cash pressure at that time. And another one of our graduates happened to be the chief information officer of T-Mobile, and they were friends, so they talked about this. And even though he was one of the 4 top people in the company, when the company sat down to make decisions in a telephone company, the information portion of things is pretty important because that's what they sell. And even he couldn't figure out how to talk the others into that. If it wasn't a sustainability issue in your heart, it didn't work. It didn't make sense financially when you could buy more bandwidth or whatever with that same money. So it was for a while, nothing happened. And this is often the case in entrepreneurs. You just can't figure out how to make it happen for a while, but you don't give up. Jeff then ran into a guy who wanted to start an insurance program inside T-Mobile. So that didn't work either because the cost of the new phones to settle all the insurance claims, it just didn't seem like it was going to make enough money to go to the trouble of making a new business. But then Jeff said, two problems equals one solution. What if we use the refurbished phones to settle the insurance claims? Suddenly, that is a system, and this is very interesting that entrepreneurs often have to be whole system thinkers. When you think of the larger system and the connections between things, suddenly a business model emerges that makes sense. And so they built an insurance business. It's over $1 billion, so that's not bad, right? But as they say in infomercials, but there's more. So they ended up with excess refurbished phones left over in good condition, good phones. And they came up with the idea, what if we split the service which we sell into two pieces? I mean, it's not a phone plus the ability to connect it to a network. It's a phone and the ability to connect it to a network. What if you pay separately for those? Well, from the customer point of view, if it's a new phone, price is not that different from AT&T. The only advantage is at the end of the 2 years, you can stop paying for the phone. But if it's a used phone, since the phone is the largest portion of that transaction,
Yes.
It greatly reduces the price of getting phone service. Now, T-Mobile at this point went from losing 500,000 customers a quarter, that is to say, going out of business, to gaining 2.3 million customers a quarter, that is to say, being a dominant force in the industry. They went from being acquired by Sprint to acquiring Sprint.
Oh.
So what we're talking about is an existential solution
Yep.
for the whole company, just because somebody or some buddies were thinking entrepreneurially about sustainability and building a better world and dealing with climate change and pollution and those sorts of issues.
Yes.
I think this is important for people in senior positions to recognize that the energy among the young, and Jeff is not that young, so among older people as well, is so strong for dealing with the problems so that they can have a future, and so that their children can have a future, and so that their grandchildren can have a future. We're jumping off a cliff at the moment. It would be a good idea to turn around. And that energy is present in over 70% of the employees say, I wish our management would do something about these issues. I would rather work for a company. And in fact, many of them are saying, I'm going to leave this company if we're not doing something about this. And if I'm not able to engage myself in doing something about this. So that looks like a human resources issue. I'm telling you, it's an existential company issue. And that the innovations that those people will drive, I mean, one of the constraints that they fall under, which they don't resist, is, oh, by the way, you have to make money if you want to do something new. Okay, I'll figure out how to make money in the context of my values.
Yes, that's wonderful.
I can tell you many stories like this. I can tell you about one of our graduates that saves 1 million tons of carbon every year. That's the equivalent of taking 423,000 cars off the road and putting them through the crusher and not building new ones. I mean, these are big impacts that people can make by pursuing sustainability.
Yes.
Because, sustainability is about not doing things that you can't continue to do, which means not burning huge amounts of fossil fuel energy, not wasting resources, not doing all those. All that makes money. But it also drives into the marketplace, and then there's one other thing I want to talk about, if I may, which is using entrepreneurship in internal services. 80% of employees don't work directly for customers; they work for somebody else.
Yes.
So if you're doing market research, you're working for a product manager who you can argue is or is not doing something for the customers, but certainly the market researcher is not, the maintenance man is not, and so forth. And so these people can be organized entrepreneurially, and what were mundane, boring jobs become exciting entrepreneurial opportunities. And we've worked out a system for doing that. And when installed in the U.S. Forest Service, who kindly lets me talk about exactly what happened, the productivity of those employees became 1.8 times as large as the average Forest Service employee, because they were living the dream of their entrepreneurial thing, even though they might be scaling trees, and they might be designing the signs for people to see when they came into the forest. They might be making videos or whatever they were doing, but they came on fire. And if you can make a 1.8 times increase in the productivity of 80% of your employees, that is a much bigger effect than any new product is likely to be.
Absolutely.
So I think when we think of entrepreneuring as just being about new products,
Yeah.
I know of someone who released the entrepreneurs inside his division inside a large company to solve a financial problem. They had to cut their budget. He cut his budget in 1 year by 19.4%, or $121 million, just by releasing the entrepreneurs inside a city and telling all his managers, hey, if they want to do something to save money and it doesn't threaten our division's ability to deliver its product, just do it, just say yes. And so hundreds and hundreds of innovations later, $121 million.
That's brilliant. That's absolutely, it's inspirational to hear these stories. And what I love is that you have the data to back it up. I mean, intuitively, anyone would sense that if you allow that talent within an organization to be put to use and to bubble up, that it will really pay off in spades. But I love the fact that you actually have the dollars and cents, and you can actually quantify return on investment. You can give us the data on it.
And let me give you an example of how unlikely some of the people who stepped forward were. So there was a clerk who was working on the annual audit, and she was going around and she was looking at the list of the equipment that the division owned, and the equipment sitting in the shelves, and checking off on the box every piece of equipment that existed, that was on the list, and noting any that were missing, and so forth. Now, does that sound like the most creative job you've ever heard in a company?
Of course not. So keep going.
So she noticed that dust was building up on some of the pieces of equipment. And she came back next year, and there was more dust on that pieces of equipment. And it occurred to her that this equipment was never being used. So she went to her boss and she said, can I sell all the dusty equipment on eBay? He said, yes, of course. Why would I not say yes to that? Because I've been told to say yes, that it clearly is not threatening us, and it looks like it would make money. Now, it made money in three ways. One, money that came back into the budget for selling it on eBay. Two, they didn't have to depreciate it anymore.
Yes.
So that depreciation came out of the budget. And three, she got rid of so much equipment that they greatly reduced the space they were renting, which was one of the major items in that $121 million was less space. And so what looks like a kind of a nobody,
yes,
if empowered, suddenly turns out to be a superstar.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what I love about that example, Gifford, is the fact that she was able to do that because she really understood her job, and she understood how things operated at that level and in that space. So it's the kind of insight someone who was higher up within the organization, a senior manager, they would never have, because they don't see what she sees every day. And
exactly.
She understands what's happening. And that's why if we could engage everyone in the business to put their eyes around their own area, there is so much opportunity in every space within a business for exactly that kind of thing, if people were given permission to bring their opportunity finding eyes to work every day and be told yes.
So let me give you one more example.
I love your examples.
It's another way to use entrepreneuring. So the CEO came up with a new strategy and told all the divisions to implement the strategy in their division. all the divisions but one put together a strategic planning team and sat around at tables talking about how to implement the strategy in their division. The division we were working with went out, the division lead went out and gave a speech on the strategy to all 20 of his facilities, and then said, anybody who has an idea and wants to work on it, that to implement this strategy in our business should please come to a meeting. And they told us 30 people might show up. 125 showed up. We ran a giant poster show where everybody showed off their ideas and told them that if they could form teams of 3, all of which around one idea,
yeah,
they would get to go into an accelerator. 14 teams entered the accelerator. 9 were funded on graduation. 6 became profitable businesses. And that division had 9, I don't know, there was 6 or 9. They had a bunch of products in the marketplace before any other team did anything at all.
Yes.
Other than talk.
Exactly.
And
so while they were all talking,
yeah.
this group was actually taking action and bringing things to fruition before they even got around to doing anything, the other group.
So people often think of entrepreneuring as a kind of let 1,000 hours bloom, 1,000 flowers bloom, a kind of random entering of the white space of around the corporation, as opposed to a focused strategy. But entrepreneuring can be a strategy implementation tool, which is actually superior to standard strategy implementation. So it can be the people up there who are thinking about this can say, you know, when Bill Gates says, well, I think maybe we should take the internet a little more seriously after he ignored it for years, he could say, hey, we're going into this area. Anybody who has ideas as to how to do this, we're going to help you out with a little accelerator or something like that, so you can get a good business model and get some feedback and run some tests and so forth. And then we'll decide which of those things to go forward with. That could have happened much faster. And that is something which I think is a form of entrepreneuring which is very rarely used, which is for, okay, we know what the strategy we want to implement is. We're just looking for entrepreneurs who know how to implement a piece of that strategy. And yet, in terms of a rapidly changing world, I think that's a very important kind of entrepreneuring that companies need to take advantage of. Because companies do need a kind of coherence. They do need they do need to say, we're putting our energy over here, and there will be synergy between these things if we do a bunch of things in this strategic area.
Yes, and maybe that would be a good segue into my final question for you, Gifford, which is about the future of entrepreneurialism. You know, where do you see this going over the next few years in terms of a global movement, in terms of how people are going to take it up, in terms of how it's going to be incorporated into the standard practice within organizations? What do you see on the horizon for entrepreneurialism?
I think companies will become more and more entrepreneurial, and I'll explain why that is. If you look at the jobs of the future, I mean, the routine mechanical jobs are going away.
Yes.
The not so routine mechanical jobs are going away. The analytic jobs are going away. The artificial intelligence is doing this better than people. What is left for people to do? And it turns out there are 2 very significant things that people do better than machines. One is care. When I am lying in my deathbed and a little machine wanders in and says, how are we feeling today, Mr. Pinchot? It's not really going to console me like a human being would be. Only human beings can care. And caring is a very important part of everything that humans do. We're social creatures. So that's something machines cannot replace. The second thing is creativity. Human beings are uniquely good at guiding the creative process, partly because we understand other humans better than machines do. So that's a very something which will be with us for a long time. Now, both of those things require what psychologists call intrinsic motivation. Motivation that comes from the inside, not from being told what to do.
Correct. Yes.
Carrots and sticks
Yep.
actually reduce creativity, and they reduce caring. If someone tells me, Gifford, if you don't care about our customers more, you're going to get fired. Well, what immediately happens is I care more about how my boss thinks about me than I do about customers, right? It actually reduces the caring, because caring has to come from the inside or it's not genuine. And people are remarkably good at telling whether something is genuine or not. It's one of our basic skills. And so if all work is suddenly going to be intrinsically motivated, you say, what is the model in corporate life for managing people who are intrinsically motivated? And the answer is entrepreneurship. We've had to be manage intrinsic motivation all along, because entrepreneurs are absolutely dead in the water if they're motivated by anything else. And so the tools of entrepreneuring are going to spread out. It's not always going to be called entrepreneuring, but the ways of managing, the tools, everything that we've learned about how to be a good manager of innovation is actually very broadly useful in managing this new kind of work. And a lot of it will look like entrepreneuring. It will look like those teams of people who were making videos inside the Forest Service and so forth. And the control system will probably be more of a self-organizing control system, which markets are really good at. So internal markets between free people actually work pretty well to weed out the stuff that's not working and drive the stuff that is working. So I see a relatively thin chain of command in organizations. It is running the company, but I see most of the people sitting in entrepreneurial roles of one kind or another, and those people, and they're responding to the chain of command, who is, after all, got all the money.
Yes. Thank you so much for so beautifully articulating that whole process and where we're headed and what the future of work is going to look like. I really appreciate your time, Gifford. Thank you so much for being with us today and for being so forthcoming. It's been a joy to speak with you. And
it's a joy to speak with you.
Thank you very much. And I look forward to further conversations with you in due course.
Thank you. Bye-bye. I really appreciate it.